Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I'm your host, Jonathan Taylor. Today's video, as you might have guessed, is another interview, and because I can't really interview myself, well, I could, but it wouldn't really make for good content. I instead have a special guest with me, who weirdly, for some reason, is on the other side of the screen as compared to how Discord usually sets me up. But you know what? I'm not even gonna question it. So. Special guest, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Rachel Corsini, and I write women's fiction with heavy romance. I live in New York. I work as a public school teacher in the city. Um, and yeah, I've also been a ballet dancer for many, many years, addicted to like coffee, too much coffee. And I love to crochet. So those are just like a little things about myself.
You're another one in a surprisingly long list of teachers whose books I read and or who I've come to know as authors. Because as of the time of this recording, I haven't yet read your book. I have to admit. That being said, uh, before we go any further with this conversation, is there any topic you do not want to approach over the course of this interview?
No, I'm pretty open. Like I there's most of it is like in my book to begin with. So I mean, it's not really. I kind of talk about everything. I talk about the public. I could talk about publishing process, writing process, all of that stuff.
Okay, good to know. Well then, well then it's time to get in the thick of it because I know you have, as you already mentioned, you have a book out. Is your and I have to ask, is your novel debut your writing debut, or do you have other published written work outside of that?
So I wouldn't necessarily. I had small pieces published, so it wouldn't be like my writing debut because when I graduated from college, like one of my first pieces that when I wrote about in college, because I went to school for writing, um, was published in my school newspaper. Like it was just like a little like literary supplement. It was a very, very short piece of fiction that was published. And then when I graduated from college, I did a lot of part-time jobs and I worked for a local newspaper. So I ended up getting a lot of bylines in journalism in like my local area. So I was in the local newspaper a lot. Like I think I wrote like 5 or 6 articles a week or something like that. And that is a crash course in writing. And then after that, I kind of stopped writing for a while. So my novel debut, like this is like my published novel debut, but not the first thing that I've had as a byline.
I'm gonna do something for the first time. Namely, I'm gonna ask you to hold your phone from portrait mode to landscape mode.
I could do that. Hold on, let's see if it'll work. Ta-da!
Okay, thank you. I should have asked Dan that, but what's past is past. Anyway, next question. What inspired your novel?
So, Sushi and Sea Lions is heavily inspired by my own life. There's really something to the writing tip, like write what you know. I've written a lot of things prior that I never finished. Like I dabbled in a lot of different things, which I think was really good training ground. Like so I was a starter to a midway point writer and then never finish. It was very, very weird. So I had started a historical fiction novel that I never finished that's about halfway done. I mean, I still have all these things. Like they're just like sitting. I thought I wanted to do fairy tale retellings and I started like this like kind of weird Peter Pan retelling and then I dropped it and then I started like it's like it was like a constant stream of starting and non-finishing things. And then um I stopped writing like entirely because life just it got crazy hectic, it got in the way. I mean, like I was working, I was, whatever, and I just didn't write. And then um I ended up in this situationship with a guy who was my friend first. I'm just going to throw it out there. I ended up in a situationship with a guy who was my friend first. And it's like, sometimes we break our own heart. Like he told me that this was going to be, and I was like, "No, I'm different. I'm special." Ladies, if you're watching this, believe what someone actually tells you as opposed to like the things that they do, because men will tell you things like when you're dating them, they'll like tell you, and don't question it, right? And then like trust your instincts anyway. So I was stupid, um and eventually, and so I had to end that, and it was like very, 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 I was heartbroken. um and this all culminated on Christmas Day. I was crying basically with a bottle of wine, and my aunt came to console me, and she was like, "Well, you can't just sit around and cry." She's like, "So, what are you going to do? Like, you used to write all the time. Why don't you try writing?" So I was like, well, basically sobbing. I was like, "I don't know. I don't think that's going to help." And and I started writing. I did. I started journaling. And then it started to turn into like, hey, like this could be a story. And then it just spiraled from there. And then all of the things that I think I needed to write about, and the character of Daniela, who is very much similar to me, but there are things that are different. She's a much more exaggerated version of me because she is fiction. Um, and like, so there were all of the things in this book, every single thing that I could possibly place on a character that like I've had issues with. And I was like, wow, this is better than therapy. I should have done this earlier.
Okay, that's
So
that.
that's the long part. That's how Sushi and Sea Lions got written.
Okay. Funnily enough, that kind of applies to me, to my work as well, because
Yeah.
even though my book is actually about officer cadets at a military university, um, uh, I touch upon other topics such as the kind of situationship that you describe, or really something that could have potentially been a situationship on the one hand, and uh, really what it's like to go abroad as a student, as a university student. So that those experiences, or those desires, kind of flowed into uh, my writing debut as well. What about your other work? What inspired that? Did you just did you just pick up things from your environment and think, oh, that'd be cool to do?
So other like, you mean like when I was dabbling in different like
Yeah, that.
stories and stuff?
Yeah, that.
Yeah. So um so we'll talk about like the fantasy element. Like I've always been a very big fantasy reader, particularly fairy tales. And actually, Peter Pan is my favorite book. Like, even though I write adult fiction and write women's fiction, which is more relatable to me, Peter Pan is still my favorite book. It always has been my favorite book. It is actually still a dream of mine to write a Peter Pan retelling. Um, and so, like, that's really where that stemmed from. Like, oh, I think like this could be something that I would be really good at. And I actually like in grad school, I took a children's literature course, and that was amazing because you get to hyper analyze the work from the inside out, right? And read scholarly articles about the themes and ideas and literary theory behind like why certain stories were written or what fairy tales were meant to do, right? um and obviously, and then you learn about like the history and the authors, and and things like that. So that was always has always been very interesting to me. And I also really love history, so if we're going to talk about like me trying to write historical fiction, so I give credit to any author who is a full-time historical fiction writer, and because it is a lot of work, right? There is a lot of like if you're writing straight up historical fiction, like even though your characters might not be real, but you're using real places and it's a real time period, it's a real setting. Like you have to accurately research that. Otherwise, you're going to get called out. Like you can't call it then like researched historical fiction. It is a lot of work. And I think when I started to get into it, I didn't realize how much work that is. I'm, but I am a little bit like of a minor historian in the like turn of the century um New York and the underbelly of like how that functioned. So talking about like, the 1860s through like 1915, 1918, like that. Like that's like my favorite time period of New York City. It was very corrupt. And like for the lower class, right? And well, I mean even upper class because they ran everything, but like so I did kind of know a lot about that anyway. And so that was like the time period that I was focused on. Um but yeah, that and it just spirals. But it taught me a lot too because there was a lot of plot heavy stuff happening in that story and I realized that I'm not really a plot heavy writer. I'm more of a character driven writer and like I wanted to get more into like deep into my characters' feelings and thoughts and ideas, but I needed to push the plot along. And it was becoming an exceptionally long book, and I was like, oh, it's like this just can't be. And Sushi and Sea Lions, on the other hand, is an internally motivated book, right? It's first person. It's about Daniela's life. It's about how she grows and changes as a character from beginning to end. I mean, she happens to fall in love, which is like a wonderful thing, right? And everyone wants, you want to read that if that's what you're reading the book for. Um, and you want the juicy stuff, right? You want the spicy scenes, but it really is about her growth and change from the start of the book until the end of the book. And I was able to do that. And so, you know, I think venturing off into other genres and writings and methods and short story, flash fiction. I think that's good. It can be like good training muscles for you. And then you figure out what it is you want to write, and then that's what you move into more, kind of a thing.
Okay. Uh, now, now you said you're a very character-driven kind of author, so I have to say,
Yeah.
how do you create your characters, or where do you seek out, uh, the things that make them come to life?
So again, Daniela was very heavily based on myself. So I took a lot of things from myself and I poured them into her, which is fine, right? Like I was the one that was writing it. And then I also realized like I'm stealing from my friends and like my family members and and stuff like that. And like so her friends, so if we want to get down to like the minutia of it, and my work in progress actually is about Daniela's best friend in the book, who is based on one of my very best friends, and then also another friend like mixed in. So when I create other characters that are not based around myself, because I feel like I don't have ownership over them in that way. Like, so her friends are based on multiple pieces of my friends. They're not entirely one person. Because I just don't feel like that's fair. It's like I'm stealing their life almost. But so like I take like different aspects of like people that I've encountered or people that I was friends with or I'm still friends with, and I like say, oh, this will be like this should be a part of this character, and like and this fits in with this character, and then and I put them together and I make a new person. So they're inspired by real people, but I it's never one person unless I'm writing about me.
Okay. Um, I have to ask to what extent to what extent you're looking at the world of the story, or about, or within the setting itself. So does that, do you have a separate process for that, or is it, or is it pretty similar, picking and choosing from places you already know?
So I write about Queens, New York, which is where I grew up, um, and New York City. So again, like this is a very, very real place. However, the town or the area of Queens where, because they don't call them towns in Queens because it's technically still part of New York City, even though it's like the outer boroughs. Um, the town in Queens where Daniela lives um is based on where I grew up, but it is not exactly where I grew up. So it's like it's a fictionalized version of the place that I grew up in. And I did that on purpose. I did that on purpose. I could have just been like, oh, this is where she moves back to. This is the name of the bar that they hang out in. This is whatever. But I decided that I was going to fictionalize that, even though they also go to real places in New York. But I made that area of Queens where they all hang out and like they live and they spend a lot of time in. I created a fictional version of it. And again, and I think because that was in a way trying to maintain a little bit of autonomy, right? Like this is like an actual place like where people live that like, you know, maybe could be recognizable from this story, or even like at the time I still lived there. And I was like, I can't be publishing like and telling people where I live like that, so that was also kind of a little bit of like a safety issue too. I was like, okay, so like people read this and they like want to meet me or whatever, they could be wandering around the area that I live at like trying to like bump into me, or like if I name the bar that they hang out in, they might like start showing up there and stuff like that. So like I don't know if that was just me like thinking too much into it, but it was also like that part of that kind of thing too. And I also wanted people to feel like, and part of the reason for fictionalizing that area as well was like also wanted people to feel like it could be anywhere that, this crew of my characters, like it could be anywhere's local bar that people go to on a Friday night every single week and hang out in. And if you sat down at your local and like looked down the bar, you could see Daniela and Vincent and Melly and Trisha and Carl and the whole crew hanging out and having a beer on a Friday night. And I wanted to create like that feeling, right? And that was kind of the whole reason behind that. So yeah, it is like a combination. It is almost a little bit similar, but it's a combination of like this fictionalized place that exists within a real place, Queens, and then also using real places in New York City to make it feel even more real.
Okay. Next up, uh, I as- I assume I might be very mistaken, but from what you've described so far, I assume your method of putting a book together is somewhat scattershot. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. No,
Okay.
no. Oh, it is. It's a disaster. It's a mess. Um,
I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. Therefore, does your book have an equivalent to what movies would call deleted scenes? So, is there anything you initially wanted to include, but then figured out that it doesn't really fit with the either with the theme or the narrative?
so way back when this was in a first iteration, like the whole thing, it was written in dual point of view from Daniela and Vincent's point of view. So I had, and then I worked with a mentor and developed the story further, and it came to my attention that this was Daniela's story and Vincent's point of view needed to go. And I was like, oh, um, so there's a lot of deleted stuff. Like there is a lot of deleted stuff or stuff that was rewritten to Daniela's point of view. That was drastically different from Vincent's point of view. So yeah, I have all of that stuff, and there was stuff like so that there's basically it's a lot of the things that are happening in the story that you don't get to see because Daniela doesn't see it happen. Because it's her, the whole story is from the first person from her point of view. So all of that stuff, yeah, like I have like a whole thing of like Vincent's point of view and like what he does and and yeah, that nobody gets to know but me.
Okay. Now I'm gonna flip this question and ask if there are any scenes that you initially thought of keeping out of the book, but then decided that they actually fit.
Hmm. No, I'm an overwriter.
Ah.
So I have to so when it comes to scenes, like I'll be like, "Oh, this is funny or this is great or this will put whatever blah blah blah," and I'll write it out. And then when I go back to like edit and finalize, I'm usually taking scenes out and then buffing off what is left, right? Like if I'm like, it's like I love this, but it's not really necessary, I'll just take it out. I'm a deleter. I'm an overwriter and a deleter. So there's not a lot of like when I'm working on editing a draft, there isn't a lot of like I need to put this in. It's more like this needs to come out.
Okay. I have to confess I'm an underwriter, so there are lots
Uh,
of points where where when I go back to a draft I supplement it. And in fact, I'm currently going through this with my current work in progress, where it's a tournament arc, and therefore there are lots of fights in it, and I found that a lot of my fights were actually running a little bit too short because I overestimated the range that characters have. So now I gotta go back through like half a dozen fights or so and and rewrite them to take that into account.
yeah.
Okay. Next
That's the
question.
totally well, I was gonna say it's like this is a totally opposite problem, but I just think that's so interesting, right? Like I almost have, you know, but again, right? Like everyone has their own process, right?
Yeah,
Like to how they write things. And I think you just have to give into your own process, and then it makes it so much easier. Where it's not like you're trying to write in someone else's box, you know?
I wouldn't say give in as much as figure out.
Yeah, we have to figure it out. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Oh, talking about the actual writing itself, or about the content that is thereby produced.
Yeah.
What part of content are you happiest creating?
What am I happiest creating? That's an interesting question. So I will full on 100% confess. I hate writing a first draft. I know this is like so the hate part is easier. I hate writing a first draft. Um, for me, it's just because I'm still learning about my character and who they are and their motivations, their wounds, like all of that kind of stuff. I'm just like, oh, come on, just tell me already. Like, tell me what your problem is. Like, why? Like, and so it's like kind of frustrating for me. Um, but what I kind of love to write, I think it's like when they have their, I'm going to call it like their aha moment. Like when like in Sushi and Sea Lions, my favorite moment that I wrote in the story was their first kiss.
Aww.
Because, yeah, like, so to me, that was like the aha moment, right? They'd circled around each other because they ended up like reconnecting and becoming friends. Um, and, and then finally, he like bit the bullet and he kissed her outside the bar. And she was like, oh my god, like and like the fireworks went off and there was like all this kind of stuff and it was like aha, like finally like things are like coming together. um and I think that's the same, and I think like when I get to that moment, that's like my favorite thing to write. I haven't gotten there in my work in progress yet. Like I haven't she's like kind of in my work in progress. She's seeing the love interest, like they're like dating and stuff, but I haven't hit her aha moment, right? Where like everything's kind of come together. Um, but that's when I get there, I'm like, yes, I did it. Yes.
Okay. Well, we already covered the flip side of the question, which was what I was gonna ask next. ask next.
Oh,
I can't talk anymore. So I guess I can. So I guess I can move ahead. Um, when you were first, well, we already talked about how the how the book was created,
right.
and while you were while you were getting while you were getting to know while you were getting to process all of that, you might not have thought about making it a book, but once the decision to make it a book, uh, came into fruition, uh, did you how did you think about publishing it?
Um, I think I kind of always knew that's where it was going. Um, so I, remember like I said, like I went to a writing program, um, and I had a lot of friends who had short stories that were published, or, um, I had professors with novels that were published. So like I kind of like I think I just deep down I was like, no, like I'm finally gonna do this. Like I'm like this is like I had like that feeling of like this is what's gonna happen with this. Like it's not just gonna be some book that I write that like sits on my computer and goes nowhere. Um Now the method of publishing, right? Like that is something entirely different because I went through the querying process. I queried for like 8 or 9 months. I got over 100 rejections. I think I got about 20 full requests, 100 rejections, um, and three offers, three offers, but all of the offers were from small presses. Um, and I ended up going the small press route. Um, but I got many full requests, and out of those, um, three, um, offers, right? So if you say like I got like the 18 full requests, I think I got like 24 requests. So like, I don't know, like 18, 17 of those were from agents that requested like full manuscripts and then, small presses and, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very grueling process. The querying process is grueling. You got to thicken up your skin if you're looking to go the more traditional publishing route. For me, self pub was never on the table. That was not something I wanted to tackle or I wanted to try to do. Um, I was not I was not interested in that. But I give people a lot of credit that do that and that are really making a living at doing that. It is very, very, very difficult to be um a successful self-published author and like putting yourself out there. I mean, it is a labor of love. Um, but I think it was always the goal was like I'm gonna try and get this book published. Like that was always the goal. Like it was never like, you know what, I'm going through this, I'm writing this, I want everybody to read it. Like I want people to read my book.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of the authors within the circle I tend to move around with kind of have that dichotomy that they want everyone to read their book, but not everyone they know personally, because they don't want to go yeah.
Nope. I ripped off that band-aid. I ripped off that band-aid really quick because like, I told my friends, I told my parents, I told my friends, I was like, listen, I'm trying to sell my book. Like, I just want you to know. And I was like, and I said it's like heavily based on my life. Like, I want you all to read it. Like, but just remember, like, it is fiction. Like, if there's stuff in there that reminds you of you, it's not just you, like it's, whatever. And like, so I like explained all of that to them. I mean, listen, it's there's some spicy scenes in my book, and my dad read it. And I was like, I was like, I'm like, at this point, right? I'm kind of like, this is what I write, and I'm not going to be ashamed of what I write. And having a book published is a big deal. And like, you know, my parents were proud of me, and I'm like, well, you should also be proud of like, of what I actually write. Like, I'm not embarrassed. Like, this is the stuff that I write. And he was like, my dad read it, and he was like, what are you embarrassed about? He's like, you're an adult. Like, whatever. He's like, this is a part of being an adult. And I was like, well, this is the stuff that I publish. And so I pulled that band-aid off quick. I was like, gone.
Okay.
Everybody can read it.
Okay, good for you. I have to admit, I actually read the book myself to my mom, so uh, yeah, to that end. And even I have, even though my book is aimed towards a younger audience, I did still include some, uh, maybe not, maybe not spicy, but sizzling moments.
Yeah.
So yeah, reading through that was maybe a bit more awkward for me than it was for her. I'll fully admit that.
Yeah, I think it's
And even
more.
then, it wasn't
I
the most
think like
awkward part of the process. But I won't go into that
I
right now.
I think like we get, not even just like with people that we know. I do think that as authors, it is such a labor of love, right? And like we're so close to our work that we don't want anyone to be like to say this is horrible, or this is this is garbage, or how could they write a story like that, or whatever. So but when you put something out for public consumption, there's also the flip side, right, where it's like people can feel however they want to feel about the way you write. I mean, if you've ever looked at like Amazon reviews, which like some of them are really really funny, like there's like this whole page dedicated to one-star reviews of classic novels. Like hilarious one-star reviews of like Moby Dick. And so it's like, okay, like it's one of the greatest American novels of all time. One-star reviews of Pride and Prejudice. Like, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's like you're either, what, you like it or you don't like it. It's art, it's creativity, and you're putting it out there into the world. Um, Again, there's also the good old advice of don't read your own reviews. D-
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Next question. Um, yeah, you described your publishing process and what that took. Have any of your ideas about uh, either the process or the industry been proven or disproven during all of that?
Um, I think like more proven than disproven. Um, and not just like from the indie front, like there's just the publishing industry itself has changed very drastically, like over the course of I would call it like is over the course of like the past like 5 to 7 years, right? It's become so very different. Um, in trade, like if you're not already a big ticket author, or like something happens that like puts you on the map and makes you a big ticket, like you you still have to market your own book. I mean, the marketing budget is very very small for um debut authors and mid list, which like the mid list is like starting to disappear. Like it's either you're a big ticket, or you're a debut, or whatever it is. So like mid list is like disappearing, like those B filler authors that like people kind of know, but like whatever. um
Yeah, I know what you mean.
so
And I actually
that's become,
go ahead, go ahead.
yeah. And so like that on that side of it, like that's totally expected. So, I had to like kind of figure out how to market my own book and kind of like get it out there, or like different things that I could do, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, just like, and the wait time and the whole process and the editing and the like, none of that was like very surprising to me.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
I have to say, your thoughts on what it is that publishers seek. I did kind of echo them in another interview that I'm gonna link in the iCard, which I assume is gonna be atop your head. Uh, and I basically had another interview where I did a whole rant about it, and I basically said that the that the entire publishing industry is expecting like uh, expecting like to build a rainforest, but instead the thing is, publishing isn't really a rainforest or a jungle. It's a swamp. Like there's like you won't find a lot of you won't find a lot of high tops and big money names, but you'll find a lot of like smaller, more fertile, more strange like undergrowths that are bound to that are bound to create something that is still very interesting, but a little bit too crazy to spike up. But and and however, because the industry is looking for the trees, it's missing the forest, so to speak. It's missing the other aspects of the forest,
Hmm.
and over time, those other aspects will potentially either take over the rainforest or it'll just die out. But I don't think it'll die
Yeah.
out. I think it'll get. I do assume that it's likely it'll be chopped down and then start to regrow again, but more swampy.
Yeah, a lot of the feedback that I did get when I was querying was like it had nothing to do with my writing or like even the story. It was the the issue of
How are you gonna
like
market this?
genre. Yes. Yes, it was the issue of it. I had a feedback about that, about like this is like mixed genre. It's like women's fiction, but however, it is like contemporary romance and like and this, and we don't know who wants this right now. And so that was a lot of the feedback that I did receive, and I was like, okay, so this this is why ultimately agents are not going to take on this book, because there's the formula is not there for this story. They don't know who to pitch it to or how to pitch it. And so that's when I was like, okay, I need to focus more on the small press market, because otherwise it'll never get out there.
Okay. Next up, now if I recall correctly, your book has been out for a while. So I have to ask,
Yeah.
to what extent have you been catching up with its reception, or maybe even before its release, as the as you were sending out arcs, assuming you did that.
Yeah.
How would how did that work out for you? And are you gonna do anything different with the with your current work in progress?
So I did have very favorable reviews. Like I had like a fairly good reception. I think like for being a indie no name author with like in a little bit of a saturated market, I think I've done fairly well. Which is really nice to be received like that. So that's good. I don't know if I could really do anything differently with my next book, but I have there's like more like the author web is like broader because I published a book. So like now it'll be like easier to get like people to like actually commit to getting an arc, to reading. So it should get like a little bit bigger of a reception based on that, because already like I have a lot of people that have like I have read the first one now that are like, oh, I'm like totally ready for the next one, or I can't wait until you finish and like get that next one coming out and like blah blah blah. So like, it's like with anything, right? Like you have to like start like dipping your toe in the water, and then like the next one kind of like it like cycles on itself. It ends up doing like the work a little bit for itself, and then which also like feeds back into, you know, you it also sometimes lends to more sales for your first book. So it like it all like piggybacks on one another, right? And like my books are standalones, but deal with characters from the first from it's dealing with a character from the first book. So if someone picks up the second book and is like, wait, like who is this couple? They can read the first book. They can go back and read the first one and see how those two ended up together. And
Okay.
so, so like it like they ping pong off of each other. Um, I mean, I just have to finish the next one, but as
Yeah.
every writer, right? Like it's like, I just got to finish it.
Yeah.
No big deal.
My next question was gonna be about the about friends or family who who might know about your writing endeavors, but you already answered that. You said it. You ripped off the band-aid, so I can skip over it
Yep.
uh, and get to this question. Has working on your debut or on its release in any way informed you of anything that you would like to do uh, different differently with the next one or with the next few, because who knows how many you're gonna get out.
Um, so I will say figuring out like my style or my voice as a writer, like through the process of writing the first one, that has been huge because this has been much less work, right? In that aspect. Like I know there's still editing work and there's still stuff to be done, but there's it's much less in that regard as opposed to having to figure out my voice while writing Sushi and Sea Lions. Um, Also the submission process for me is probably going to be very different because um I am with a publisher that I can directly submit my next book to um when it's finished, and either they can choose to take it or not. And then if they don't take it, then I can like go off and figure out other avenues or like another way that like I want to publish it. Um so that's kind of interesting, right? Like when you're in that position where it's like I know my publisher wants to see my next book already. Um I'm not contracted for the next book, but I know that they want to see my next work, right? So that is drastically different than like being out there in the querying trenches trying to like get someone to read your first chapters or request it or something like that. Yeah, so that is a little bit different in the process, I think, in the writing
Okay.
process, and also like, yeah.
And now we're now that we're almost done, I have to ask, of all the questions I've asked you so far, are there any you would want me to answer?
um no, this is a good one. Let me see which one is one. Okay, so what do you hate? What I always like the hate part of the writing process. What part of the writing process do you hate?
Hmm. Well, I'm I, I don't really think I can pull off descriptions quite well. So that's kind of my point of contention. Whenever I do write descriptions, I have to keep in mind that not necessarily how I see these people, but that different characters will receive not different characters, different people will receive different impressions of these characters. So even if I describe them down to like their uh, down to how many millimeters wide their jaw is, they'll still see something. They'll still see something different
Yes.
from what I do. So you really have to work on. So I really have to work on giving the impression of the character rather than the exact specifics. But you still need a certain number of exact specifics, and figuring that out
Yeah.
is not pleasant.
Yeah. I mean, but that's how I write my characters. Like, I want to give a certain, I guess, like, there are certain like hallmarks of like their features and stuff, right? And like how they should be perceived a little bit, but like I don't like fill in a lot of that stuff, right? Like, yeah, so that can, it can be difficult to figure out like the fine line between like describing every single thing of a person, or and then like giving your reader freedom to like fill in the blank on what they look like.
Okay. And now, before we close, I want to ask: is there any link, platform, or person that you would like to shout out before we close out?
Oh yeah, so I could definitely give a shout out to like one of my pub buddies. She's amazing, Diane Billis. She writes sapphic romance, LGBTQIA plus fiction. Um, her next book is coming out really, really soon. It's called Superficial. It's a
By
superhero.
the time this video comes out, it'll already have been out, and
Okay, so it'll already have been out. So you should check out Diane and her writing. She is awesome, and she's also like a very big champion of other authors, and she always sends me things to like sign up for and suggest for me to do, and like she's really, really sweet. Um who else can I give a shout out to? Oh, and another like fellow indie romance writer friend of mine, Regina Brownell. She writes straight up contemporary romance. If you are really, really into that, it's really, really good. She's got it, like she's got that down, right? Like all of the beats are down, and if you want to just like read something like that and like just be like transported into a love story, Regina really knows how to do that very well.
okay. And how about you? Where can people find you?
Oh, and where can you find me? You can find me literally almost everywhere. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, X, Threads,
You can call it
and
Twitter
Blue Sky.
here. No, no one will
Yeah,
judge you.
Twitter. At Madame Ray Ray, MADAMERAE. I am on all platforms as that same username. I'm like, streamlined. You can find me on my website, rachelcorsini.com. Um, yeah, you can pretty much get me anywhere. My big one for all of my author stuff is my Instagram, and then you can find my link tree there. There's buy links. There's like all of my stuff going on there.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that with us, and
You're welcome.
thanks for being here, and thank you to everyone who's
Of
been
course.
quite patient with us in following up so far. I very much hope you've enjoyed this interview. If you have, well then please like the video, maybe even share it wherever you think other people will also like the video. If there is anything you'd like to add, either to myself as an interviewer or to the special guest herself, well, that's what the comment section is for. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well, then please subscribe. Ideally, also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. My books, the first of my own Heir to the Empire series, The Next Generation and A Path Not Taken, are available at various book retailers under their respective master links in the description down below. Right past my social media links, which I also suggest you check out should you choose to. Additionally, I have a Patreon where you can support me, and depending on the level at which you pledge, you will receive various perks. You know how Patreon works. Come on, it's not your first day on the internet, or even on YouTube, to be honest. Also, I have a second channel where I talk about whatever else I'm interested in, but mainly it's still other forms of storytelling media aside from books and literature. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on books and literature, then you can very much stay on. I can very much recommend that you stay on this channel and go through my extensive backlog of book reviews, writing advice, and the occasional interview. If none of those interest you, then I suggest you go ahead and do whatever you want with the rest of your day because it is your day after all. And oh, look at the time on my non-existent watch. It's. I think we're good to go. We're good to wrap up here. So until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair.